Scuffletown Media.
KLAS-TV, Channel 8, Las Vegas, where news comes first.
I'm Bambi Jew. Do you know what it's like to have a reputation? I do. I have a reputation for being very, well, entertaining. Join us for Minsky's Burlesque at the Hacienda. We've got it all, and you'll get to see it.
With all three targets now in custody, Mathis was ready to start congratulating himself. He, Ramos, Bunker, and a few guys from CID had made plans to spend the night celebrating at Minsky's Burlesque, a Las Vegas staple since back in the 60s. His investigation had gone even better than expected. He knew there might be a chance that the money laundering count wouldn't hold up. Since technically Larry never laundered anything, he had gambled the money away playing poker. But Mathis stacked the charge regardless. He wanted the case to be as heavy as possible. That way, when he sent the paperwork up, the prosecutor would have plenty of options. But the truth is, he didn't even care about the money laundering charges, because he had federal trafficking and conspiracy cases on all three of them now. And based on what he knew, he thought they were open and shut. As for Larry's Buffalo friends, Mathis was so sure of their guilt, he didn't even bother getting their side of the story before writing up their paperwork. His complaint and sworn affidavit were supposed to detail the three key elements of every investigation: the charges, the evidence, and most importantly, the probable cause, tying it all together. The charges and the evidence were there, but by the time Aiello and Joya were transferred to intake, his probable cause was hanging by a thread. They both came off so genuinely perplexed by the accusations, not to mention furious over Larry stealing their money, that Mathis decided he couldn't even risk having them sit for polygraphs. Then the longer the interview went, the clearer it became that Mathis had built his entire case around an unverified assumption. The assumption that Aiello and Joya were aware of what their money was being used for. Somehow it wasn't until the wiretap conversations were reviewed that investigators realized the calls contained nothing that suggested either Aiello or Joya had any knowledge that Larry intended to use their money to buy cocaine, or that any conspiracy ever existed at all. Whether it was a simple oversight or the product of confirmation bias, this was the fatal mistake that would ultimately sink Metro's case and Mathis. Mathis shifted his focus right away, from proving his case to protecting what was left of his brittle narrative. He rejected the idea that Larry could have outmaneuvered him, that Larry intentionally insulated himself and his friends by keeping them in the dark about what the money was really for. Because after all, without knowledge, there can't be a conspiracy. But Mathis refused to believe it, because that would be strategic. That would take planning. And the Larry he thought he knew wasn't that smart. I'm Brad Rachi from Scuffletown. This is Lucky Larry. It's episode 6, Outrageous Government Conduct.
I don't believe that the commission of crime is a proper way to enforce the laws against crime.
In his order, Federal District Judge Lloyd George said the court is nonetheless compelled to conclude that Metro officers crossed the line in this case and that their conduct was so outrageous as to constitute a violation of defendant's due process rights. And Metro isn't talking about the conduct of its intelligence unit.
Because it is a highly secretive organization.
The Clark County Holding Center was notorious back in the 90s, even by Vegas standards. Lawyers used to joke that half of the lawsuits in the city started inside that building. Guards operated as if civil rights were optional, and the ones who were on duty that Christmas Day weren't any different. So officially, the DA's office issued an order to keep Aiello, Joya, and Larry far apart. What was even more on brand, though, was that while Aiello and Joya were being escorted to intake, guards allegedly offered to let them beat the shit out of Larry if they paid them $500 each. Whether the order was ignored by accident or by request, they were housed right next to Larry. And as far as Larry was concerned, as soon as they got there, those bars started feeling a lot less like punishment and a lot more like protection.
There's been, what the fuck, the conspiracy to traffic and control substance. And these two guys are looking to have a good time. They grabbed another $20,000 from them. They came out to gamble with. They confiscated their clothes, their plane tickets. These two guys sit in the cell next to me, telling me that I'm in trouble. I'm going to get my head beat in. Guys, I had to do what I had to do. I had to save my family. We'll work this thing out. So it's not working out. They believe that these guys are drug dealers.
So almost a full 2 days later, a court-appointed public defender was able to convince the judge to grant Larry's release. It was under the condition that Chloe be appointed his third-party custodian, of course, and that he'd check in weekly with pretrial services. But Joya and Aiello, they weren't nearly as lucky. They lived 2,000 miles away. They had no roots in Vegas, no homes, no family. Nothing to keep them from leaving the state if they so chose. So prosecutors argued that made it far easier to lose track of them. And the Honorable Joseph J. Whitcomb agreed. He denied bail and ordered them to be kept in custody. Those next few weeks dragged by at the pace of a drunken sloth. Larry was more toxic than ever. But the truth is, Metro knew Larry was never as connected as they made him out to be. They had only portrayed him that way to justify their investigation. Because his brother Tommy was the real objective all along. Everyone knew that. It was just dumb luck that Tommy happened to have a brother who was such a soft target. By Larry's own admission, when word of his arrest got out, he and Chloe were ostracized. There were certain people who had good reason to be concerned about what he might start saying if the pressure ever got to be too much. So as long as there were questions, he was deemed not to be trusted. Tommy even kept his distance.
Word in the streets is, what am I? Now they don't even know if I'm going to become an informant and facing 20 years. My brother's not talking to me. His friends ain't talking to me. It's a real bad thing now.
Louis Joya and Joseph Aiello were eventually released on bond, and Judge Whitcomb allowed them to return to Buffalo, with the condition that they wear an ankle monitor and agree to be returned to Nevada if they violate any conditions. Instead of spending a couple days in Vegas, buying cars and having a good time, they spent 2.5 months in the Clark County Holding Center. And when they got home, all told, Larry had gotten them for $30,000. The police got another $20,000. And not to mention they had federal drug trafficking charges hanging over their heads. That said, as soon as their plane touched down at BNI, they were happy. They were home. For about a month anyway. Then the indictments came.
Oh, it was devastating. Well, now, the shit really hits the fan. Because now I'm under federal indictment for trafficking in drugs. I got these two poor innocent guys. They're indicted from Buffalo.
All 3 warrants were sealed to avoid the risk of anyone catching wind of the impending arrests and jumping off the map. On March 30th, 1991, at 7 a.m. Eastern, 4 a.m. Pacific, Joseph Aiello, Louis Joya, and Larry Palermo were arrested in 3 simultaneous raids, carried out by the U.S. Marshals, and taken to their local federal court to be arraigned. Lawrence R. Levitt, federal magistrate judge of the District for Nevada, allowed Larry to post bond and await trial at home. But Aiello and Joya were arraigned in Buffalo, in front of Judge Leslie G. Foscio of the District for Western New York. And this time it was different. Prosecutors in Buffalo weren't starting from scratch. Aiello and Joya's names had already popped up in more than a few 302 reports by then. 0 chances were soon to be taken.
The government of Canada and Canadians don't want to be on anybody's back burner or taken for granted at any time.
I think I understand his position pretty well, yeah. And yes, I got an earful.
And he offered reassurances Canada has top priority.
This relationship is fundamental, and we are determined to do our level best to keep it on a high level that it's been on in recent years.
Prosecutors got creative this time, citing an ongoing negotiation over the extradition agreement between the U.S. and Canada that at the time had been stalled for almost a year. And they argued that the lack of a ratified treaty, along with Buffalo's proximity to the border, created a clear and present risk of flight. And once again, the judge agreed. For the second time in 3 months, Joya and Aiello were remanded without bail, and the government's request that custody be immediately turned over to the U.S. Marshals was granted. Following their arraignment, they were transferred to Alden, New York, a small rural town about 20 miles outside of Buffalo, where they would be held in segregation as federal pretrial detainees at the Erie County Correctional Facility for the next 13 months.
Okay, I want to start this off by saying in clear terms that I think that this indictment is a significant event in the history of the evolution of the sophistication of the city of Las Vegas.
High-powered attorney Vincent Sansone would eventually take on Aiello and Joya's case. When he signed on, he held a press conference at his office and talked about how the only reason his clients were denied bail was because the government hoped to use them as bargaining chips against Larry. And he didn't stop there.
Things of this nature, of exactly this nature, have happened in New York with the French Connection case, and in Miami, have happened in Chicago as well. But all three of those cities have been honest enough to indict the people who did it. The police department, crooked cop.
Sansone called into question not only the reliability of Metro's investigation, but the honesty of its officers. He claimed it was less about law and more about coercion.
You're in for a very interesting 6 months to a year as this case develops. You're going to like covering this one.
So while his two oldest friends were warehoused in a Western New York prison for crimes they had no involvement in, Larry was allowed to await trial from the comfort of his own home. But what he couldn't do was afford an attorney. And the few who were in his price range wouldn't touch his case. He was forced to apply for a federal public defender, an FPD. So FPDs technically are attorneys, but they're also salaried employees of the government who represent their employer's enemies. And if that sounds like an inherent conflict of interest, that's because it is. Back in 1992, only 3% of their cases ever went to trial, and over 90% of them pled guilty. Right around this time, various accounts of Larry's story had slowly begun to find their way into local media coverage. That's how one of the city's highest profile attorneys got involved. He was the man who would soon be mayor of Las Vegas.
Only lawyers like you that have no moral conscience.
Oh, I have no moral conscience.
Okay? That's the kind of lawyer you are.
Oh, yeah, right.
The man known as Oscar Goodman. His reputation was already well established, thanks mostly to his absolute disdain for authority. He was a local folk hero in Vegas, and by the end of the decade, he'd be elected mayor. But back in '92, his notoriety came from representing some of the most controversial figures in the city's history, like Lefty Rosenthal and Tony Spilotro, one of the most feared gangsters that ever walked the strip. When Goodman took over as his lead counsel, Spilotro was already the FBI's primary suspect in 22 murders. Oscar Goodman lived to fuck with the government.
Okay, this is what's so sick about you and what's so sick about the government and guys like you. You think that any lawyer who is representing a citizen is trying to somehow screw up the system.
No,
what I'm trying to do is
just lawyers like you.
I'm trying to protect people's rights against people like you.
He'd been looking for his next opportunity for some time when he came across a quiet little piece about Larry's arrest, buried way below the fold in the Las Vegas Sun. It was just 3 little throwaway paragraphs, but Goodman saw something much, much bigger. He saw a spectacle worthy of his ego. And when word broke that he had picked up a new case, pro bono, Larry's story blew up. And while newspapers and media outlets as far away as Phoenix and San Francisco were talking about Larry, his attorney was rewriting the playbook on character assassination. For the next 12 months, Mathis, the LVMPD, the IRS, CID, the DA's office, the city, the palm trees, they all got it. Not a smear campaign, a smear rampage. He accused everyone but Penn and Teller of being involved in a plot to frame his client, but he might have pushed a little too hard for a little too long.
I can't think that a cop is going to make determinations about my clients. It's up to the citizens to do that.
Oscar.
A jury's supposed to say something, not some cop. I'm
Like you.
sorry I shook your hand when we met here. I thought you were going to be a gentleman.
He had alienated so many people that by closing arguments, members of the jury were just exasperated. What had started off as aggressive and intimidating eventually just got irritating. So while Larry was acquitted on the 2 charges that mattered most, the trafficking and money laundering, he wasn't so lucky on the conspiracy charge. And that carried a minimum of 10 years.
Thanks, Alicia. Well, it is out with the old and in with the new golden age of Las Vegas.
While Goodman's hostile tactics were causing the jury to disengage, Judge Philip M. Pro, the district's youngest judge, was leaning in more and more. He was fixed on the government's argument with precision focus. Not because their case was airtight, but because he was quietly tearing it apart. He was testing its limits. That as more and more evidence came in, those limits kept collapsing. And by the time the government rested, he was convinced this was no longer a question for the jury. It was a question of law. Larry's attorneys filed what's called a Rule 29 motion. It's basically a Hail Mary for the judge to overturn the guilty verdict. It was shot down, of course, and the trial should have ended right there. And over 98% of the time, it does. But this one didn't.
Well, aloha, Bob. It's nice of you and the Historical Society to fly me all the way to Maui for purposes of this interview.
My name is Philip Pro.
Judge Pro thought the testimony he had heard was something entirely different from what the jury had decided on. He found the government's case had raised what's called a, quote, substantial question of law or fact. It was a long and formal oral opinion, but the last paragraph from the court transcript summed it up perfectly. He stated, quote, where the evidence permits equal support for guilt and innocence, our Constitution requires that the conviction not stand. Although mindful of the jury's verdict, it's this court's opinion that there is substantial question of law or fact likely to result in either reversal or a new trial. So accordingly, release pending appeal will be granted, end quote. So while not overturning the jury's verdict, what Judge Pro essentially said was that he didn't trust their interpretation of the evidence. And just like that, Larry was home by the next morning with a big fat appeal in his back pocket, and quite possibly just enough doubt in the case to get himself acquitted. But 3 months later, the government came back sharper and angrier. They weren't about to let Aiello and Joya get off on a technicality too. And they had an advantage this time. They already knew what wouldn't work. They got the new judge to exclude all references to Larry's case. Even the slightest indirect suggestion could result in the defense being found in contempt. Then they threw out most of what they used in the first trial and leaned heavy into building a tight chain of circumstantial facts. That kept the jury from hearing the majority of Metro's evidence, which they knew themselves was shaky at best. What they did essentially was fix the problems that saved Larry. So by the time Aiello and Joya stood trial, there was no more gray area, no more substantial question of law or fact, just a streamlined case. And 3 weeks later, a streamlined verdict, guilty of conspiracy. That's all it took to fool the jury. The government was able to convict 2 innocent men, not on the strength of their evidence, but by shaping the narrative so that it was so simple the jury never even bothered to look beyond it.
There's nothing there. This indictment is based on assumptions, assumption after assumption after assumption. This is a perfect example of the government deciding on a target.
While Aiello and Joya were awaiting sentencing, Salvatore Jesse, widely recognized by his peers as one of the top appellate attorneys in the country, agreed to take on Larry's appeal. Jesse was the Bruce Lee of law. In 1989, he was voted Defender of the Decade by the ABA. The man just did not lose. If landing Oscar Goodman was an achievement, Jesse was a triumph. The very day after he stepped in for Larry, Joseph Aiello and Louis Joya were each given 7 years. Aiello was to serve his sentence at Lompoc Federal in California. Joya would also do his time in California, but at Victorville.
An explosion of violence at the federal prison complex in Victorville tonight. The prison declaring an emergency and requesting multiple ambulances after fights erupted at a number of prison housing units.
Just 3 years earlier, Congress had abolished parole for federal inmates, replacing it instead with an 85% mandatory minimum. That meant that barring an appellate victory, Joya and Aiello would spend at least 71 months behind bars. Very much unlike trial lawyers, appellate maestros like Jesse don't argue facts. They dissect mistakes. Jesse simply showed the jury where, when, and how the government in Larry's criminal trial blurred the line between association and the legal definition of agreement, which is the sole essential element of a conspiracy. He asked the court to find anything at all that even resembled an agreement between Larry, Aiello, and Joya to traffic narcotics, even the faintest trace of an agreement, because that's the only way to build a conspiracy. And this one never even got off the ground. He dissected the government story. And what was missing was proof. Specifically, proof of motivation to commit any crime whatsoever. Ironically, the government never even mentioned the word agreement because they had no evidence of one. No agreement, no plan, no conspiracy, no crime. When questioned by reporters after the appeal verdict, Jesse said frankly, as a professor of law, he was insulted by how impotent the government's case was. And almost just as consequential was how he was able to reveal Metro's actual motivation. How they went after Larry only to get to his brother, Bobby. Just over a year after his friends were sentenced, on the back of his attorney, Larry won his appeal. Judge Lloyd George, whose name now graces the facade of the federal building in Las Vegas, sat over the trial.
In his order, Federal District Judge Lloyd George said, the court is nonetheless compelled to conclude that Metro officers crossed the line in this case and that their conduct was so outrageous as to constitute a violation of defendant's due process rights.
They didn't hear it from their lawyer. In both cases, Aiello and Joya got the news from back home. Larry had won his appeal. Just like that, case overturned. He was in the clear. They had over 6 years left. It didn't sound right. Appeals don't work like that. Not in federal court anyway. And definitely not after a conviction that the feds had fought so hard to get. But then their attorney confirmed it. The appellate court had torn Larry's case apart. The same case as theirs. The same evidence. And the same story that put them behind bars. Now they were being told that Larry walked. But what they weren't aware of yet was that, as always, Larry had a plan. And those legal wins were about to shift in their favor, too. Larry and his attorneys filed a notice of claim with the county, stating his intention to bring civil suits against the LVMPD and the city of Las Vegas. Violation of civil rights, false arrest, false imprisonment, and unlawful search and seizure, plus intentional infliction of emotional distress. He was seeking $50 million, That's not including the $5 million suit he had filed against Mathis personally. $55 million. That's 130 today. And believe me, it was a lock too. He was gonna get every dime. And how do I know? Because the city offered him a settlement. One with enough money to change his bloodline for generations. And look, it was only fair. Look what they did to him. They broke law after law. They invented crimes. They changed his life forever. And for what? What, to see if he would flip on his brother? He deserved every penny. In fact, more. That's why he turned their offer down. It wasn't enough. What Larry deserved, they couldn't afford. Because it had nothing to do with money. It was about doing the right thing for once. How do you do that? Well, you can't do it with a handout from taxpayers. It doesn't matter how big it is. No, you do it by making the real criminals, the ones in government and the ones carrying badges, admit to everyone in the city what they had done. And not by issuing some superficial statement. That wasn't going to work this time. So Larry's attorneys brought his counteroffer, written by Larry himself. It read just 9 words, and this is 100% true. It said, quote, "Keep your fucking money. I want my friends out," end quote. And that was all it took. Metro and the city of Las Vegas, they decided that their integrity was worth far less than what Larry was asking for. So less than 3 months later, Joseph Aiello and Louis Joya were out on Alfred pleas and home with their families.
Yeah, and that's still one that we laugh about, man. When we made him pee his pants, and the defense attorney even said, "That's great, man. You guys played that out perfect, but I got to try and protect my client." I said, we weren't going to hurt him." He goes, "No, I know you weren't, but he thought he was going to die."
As for the other $5 million, Larry wasn't about to let Mathis off that easily. But once again, the universe would have other plans. While the case wound its way toward trial, Mathis found himself caught up in a similar entanglement. Apparently, he had tried to run the same scam on a man from Utah, but this time the FBI got involved. He was convicted of extortion and given a year in federal prison. The internal review and hearing took place in his absence. He was ultimately removed from service with a 50% pension. Shortly after, he took to car racing full-time. Then in '96, during the very first race ever run at the brand new Las Vegas Motor Speedway, he was killed in the Pro Series race. His team, ironically, was called Body Bag Racing.
You must leave now, take what you need, you think will last.
You're going to have to use your imagination if you want to try to figure out what really happened here.
You better grab it fast.
You're going to have to ask yourself questions like why and how. And could there have really been a conspiracy this big against one little innocent civilian like Larry Palermo? The answer actually is yes. Larry's story is just another great example of what was taking place in Vegas back then. There were probably a dozen of these operations going on at the same time back in the early 90s.
And it's all over now, baby blue.
All with the same end game in mind, all looking to get rid of someone or other just to make Vegas appear more family friendly. But there's no way to really know for sure if you don't trust the courts. I mean, there's only enough evidence to get imaginative. Vegas was a surprisingly violent place back in the late 80s and early 90s. Far more than we think. And I'm not talking about organized crime or mafia-type violence. Most of those stories were built up for consumption and then watered down just enough to capitalize on, like everything else in this country. I mean, there's a mob museum in Vegas, for God's sake.
and it's all over now.
$54.95 for non-state residents. That ought to tell you everything. This was never about cleansing the city, so mom and dad can start bringing their kids to Vegas. When's the last time you saw a kid in Vegas? Las Vegas has never even tried to be anything more than a perfect reflection of America. Fleece the idiots, and then do everything in your power to make sure none of the proceeds ever trickle down to the people who actually made the place worth investing in to begin with. It was a losing battle before Wall Street, and it always will be.
And it's all over now, baby blue.
They can pick you out of a crowd and break any law they want, trying to ruin your life. And who knows? If they pick you, maybe you'll get lucky like Larry did. But the odds are against it. Most likely, it'll all be over before you even. Lucky Larry comes from Scuffletown. It's researched, written, produced, and hosted without the assistance of AI by me, Brad Rachi, and my dog, Chili.